Alrighty, let's talk a little bit about CSS, shall we? I'm going to show you kind of how and where you can work with it inside of Divi, and then we'll kind of take a look at some specifics. So if you remember, all of this stuff that we're building on the web through WordPress ultimately comes down to HTML and CSS and JavaScript. And when we originally made our little page, looks something like this. Open in the browser. All right, cute little big monkey, good stuff. I was showing you how to just initially start writing code with a HTML document. And then specifically, we created a CSS document and a JavaScript document to start writing the three separate code languages that make up the web. And as we use WordPress, I mean, the reason we use that is we don't have to write code from scratch, and we can get like so much more done than we would be able to if we were writing all of this from scratch. But it does come with a bit of a downside in that when you run into a situation that you want to edit something or change something, sometimes if you can't do it within the interface of Divi, you don't really know what to do because you didn't build everything from scratch. So you don't know every little nut and bolt that's going on in the engine. You don't know how to get in there and tinker around and change things. And a lot of times that's where CSS comes in. All right, so I'm peeking at the CSS file that we made, and it's called a class and an ID, the little dot and the little hashtag before a CSS declaration. A class represents more than one, ID represents one. Now, why this is important is because everything that's laid out on the screen in some way is put there for the most part using CSS. Where it is on the screen, how it looks, all these different rules about it. And the basic tenet of CSS is that you define elements on the page. You define them either in classes, or you define them with IDs, or you can use an actual tag, like instead of putting a dot something for a class, class name, or instead of using a hashtag for an ID name, you can also just use an actual tag itself. So like the body tag, for example, is very commonly used, so that anything at all inside the entire body of the website will then have, these rules. Okay, so then rule and value. Okay, so that's kind of how CSS works, is we use what's called a selector, where we're selecting some part of our page, and whether that's an entire, so maybe instead of body, maybe I just want to say every paragraph tag, just a P, will have this specific color, and it's red, something like that. Now, what's powerful about CSS is that you can control and group things, or you can get all the way down to a very specific label or just one thing. Now, what we did in our little example here is we just created a simple class and a simple ID just to kind of show the basics. But if I look back at my HTML tag, I can see that my header tag here has a class equal to monkey. All right, and then this paragraph has an ID equal to amazing. This also has a class equal to monkey. That's really the only classes and IDs that we have set up, but we are controlling them through CSS, right? Saying dot, and then the class, the color change here will change in both instances where it says class, and the ID actually changes just the ID. So the basics of it's not that hard to grasp, that we just kind of label these different elements on our page, and then we're able to control the properties of those elements that are labeled. All right, so now the difficulty comes in of, okay, great. If I'm building my HTML from scratch, that makes a lot of sense because I can hand label my stuff, and then I can, affect it how I need. But what if all of a sudden we are using a WordPress site where we don't have necessarily access to go under the hood and label things? So let me show you a little example. I'm just going to go into a basic little test site that I'm working on here. You can see it's Divi. It has all the basics. I have not gone very far with this. I still have the default footer. This may look familiar. the default header, and I just loaded in a example page here, just through Divi from the theme editor, the layout loader in the library, loaded this theme up. Now, most of the time, I want to be very clear about this, most of the time you want, when using WordPress, you want to avoid using CSS whenever possible. You do not want to have to get under the hood. You want to be able to use the tools and the design, and definitely Divi was built in such a way that you shouldn't really have to use much CSS at all to get like 99% of what you're trying to do. Sometimes either you may not understand how you can do it with Divi, or there may be something that just is outside of the scope and you need to control it. So any single element on any of these layouts, whether I'm talking about inside the header or the footer, which is not inside of a Divi layout right now, or if I'm talking about any of this stuff that's inside the actual Divi thing, all of it can be controlled by CSS. Now, let me show you how you can just kind of open the hood of the car and look at all of the crazy stuff going on underneath it. Let's go open up the inspector. Right click and inspect inside of Chrome, and that's going to give me the inspector here. Now, right now I have it on the side, which is where it shows up by default, and the side works better for me when I am inspecting JavaScript and I'm writing a lot of JavaScript and I'm trying to figure out the errors and stuff in the page. But when I'm working, and that's when I click on console here, that shows me all the JavaScript. But when I click on elements, that's going to show me all of the HTML and all of the CSS. But I find it personally a little easier when I'm working with HTML and CSS to move this inspector down to the bottom, because it just gives you a little more to read across with the HTML tag. So I'm going to move this. It's this little 3 dots sitting right here. I'm going to click here and I'm going to move it down to the bottom, maybe bring it up a little bit. And now I'm seeing like the whole thing. So if you check this out on your site, you're going to see something similar, because this is indeed just a WordPress Divi site. But what we can do is we can actually see, again, if I click console, I can see stuff that the JavaScript has going on. It doesn't actually show me the JavaScript, it shows me output from it. But the Elements tab actually shows me all of the HTML for the entire page. And not only that, but it also shows me all of the CSS that's associated with all of these HTML tags. All right, now I've been building WordPress sites for a long time, all right, probably over 10 years if I really thought about it. And it's gotten much easier in the sense of I've had to use less and less CSS over the years. Just the WordPress and the themes and the plugins, everything has evolved to make things better. It's just how the web rolls. But there are definitely still times where I need to use it. And one of the frustrating things is there is a ton, like literally like thousands of lines of code of CSS in any given page in WordPress, because it's just handling and controlling everything. So what I want you to take a look at, it might be a little small on mine. Maybe I can blow this up a little bit. There we go. Okay, so I'm blowing up the text here, so I can't see as much across, but I can still see it going on. Now I'm actually going to close this body tag, and you can see that as I'm looking in this elements here and I'm looking at the HTML, I can see the entire page. So if I go back, oops, yeah, if I go back to peek at my index HTML page that we built from scratch in Atom, I talk about how all HTML pages have certain elements that are always there. So it needs this doc type. And look at this, we happen to have that same doc type name. Now, this one also has an HTML tag, and then it ends the HTML tag. Notice that that's exactly what happens even in a WordPress site. HTML tag ends by an HTML tag. This one has other properties in the HTML tag, like a language and a JavaScript class. We don't have to worry about that. But then next up is then the head tag, which holds all kinds of stuff. And then finally the body tag, which also is going to hold like the vast majority of our content in our page, right? So that's this HTML tag, the head and the body. Those are just basic building blocks of any page. And we do have them even in WordPress. So now I can close all of these so I can see very quickly what is in them. But if I open the head tag, for example, all of a sudden there's a ton of stuff in my head tag. Like there's tons of little links, this pingback thing, and there's just so many links to other files and scripts and media. There's just a ton of crap hanging out in here, like an absolute ton. All right, and then the same thing when I open up the body tag. All right, now this all of a sudden just has the crazy hierarchy of every single thing within our page. All right, now what I want you to look at closely is the number of classes and IDs that are used, not only with WordPress itself, but specifically with Divi. So for example, if I just have the body class right here, I can, or I'm sorry, the body tag, I can select it and it shows me this whole thing, but notice it says body class equals, and then has like all of these different, in fact, I think if it wasn't zoomed in so much, I'm not sure if that's wrapping or not, I think it is. But anyway, this has like, I don't know, 20 or 30 classes on it, which is absolutely insane, all right? So there is a home class, there is a page template default class, there is a page class. So every one of these classes are just separated by a space, and they're all individual class names. So somewhere within a CSS file that just has thousands and thousands of lines of code, there is class and IDs for everything in this. All right. So what I'm pointing out at first is how it can be kind of difficult to just go find something that you want to change in CSS just by going into the inspector and looking at under the hood, because it's very complicated. There's a lot going on. In fact, I can even click this. So here, if I select the body class or the body tag, what's cool about this inspector is I can then go over here. You can see how the styles over here will change depending on what tag I have selected. All right, so I have the HTML tag selected, and there is actually CSS on the HTML tag itself. It's setting this margin top to 32 pixels and saying it's very important. Okay, great, there's one of them. But then if I click on the body tag, now all of a sudden I can see that there is a whole bunch of CSS rules on the body tag itself. So like everything from the font family and the font size to the color, all of these things will persist across anything that goes inside of the body tag. All right, I'll come back to how we can kind of edit these and play with these in a minute, but I want to finish kind of my thought stream on just how you can open this and look under the hood at, at some of the stuff that's driving everything. I go inside of the body tag and I just start digging in. All right, notice how as I look at these divs, now it's very common to see div tags everywhere. I believe I explained that at one point, but a div tag is basically like just an empty container tag. And many, many, many things are built on the web using div tags to just, put something that doesn't have a better counterpart in terms of like the semantic markup. If it's not specifically a paragraph or a button or something that HTML has a tag for, you'll use the div tag to kind of create your own. So notice that as soon as I open up this body tag, there's just a massive hierarchy of things. Like here's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Here's like 8 levels of inception deep on this one div tag that's taking care of like this main header area. Now, again, you typically don't have to worry about this because this is just being built as you're using the Divi builder. You can see inside of here all of these different IDs. So this very top level ID equals et-main-area is the ID for it, and when I actually select that tag, it will show me kind of the element that it's grabbing here. So this is showing me that inside of a div has all of these things. And anyway, so I can go down and see plenty of IDs, plenty of classes, and there's many of them that have multiples, right? So here's one class declaration that has 1, 2, 3 separate classes that they're all part of, and that's just the way you build things. It can get very, very complicated with any WordPress site, not even necessarily a Divi site, any WordPress site with any theme, with how it's actually built under the hood. There's just a lot going on there, which is why it's so awesome and powerful for us to use it. Now, let me point out, so you can look at basically the entire HTML page if you were to kind of go through and in fact, I think there's even a way, maybe let me go to the very top level here. If I were to go to head, I can right click And here we go, expand recursively, poof. Now I don't have to click every individual little arrow. Do the same thing to the body tag, right click, expand recursively, and that will open every single tag. And now I can see that, okay, it doesn't actually have code numbers there, but I can see the, all of the code for my homepage. And as you go, every single little tag that I look at, not the closing tags, but every single opening tag at least has a class or an ID in some way. Okay, and what that means is when you build something this complicated and have to write this much HTML to control everything and all these different rules and everything, there's going to be a heck of a CSS document, if not multiple CSS documents that are handling all of this. All right. Now, one thing that's cool is as I am looking over here, and whatever I last selected is using these particular tags. So this is showing me in this class of et_pb_blurb_3. These are all just kind of built-in class names from Divi. I can see that as I go down, it gives me a little link and shows me like in a specific file where this is coming from. All right, so this one is coming from style.css, and then it's got some other version information. But I can click this, and let's see if it's minified or not. Is minified, right? That makes it difficult to deal with. Go to the very bottom. Okay, should I show you a non-minified version? Let's see if a different one of these is non-minified. Explain what that means in a minute. Minified. I guess that's not going to show me that. I bet this core is minified too. Yeah. So what that means is sometimes, like if you were to have your own CSS, like here, let me open our small little example. So I'm going to open our index page with our cute baby monkey. Click me button. Woohoo, we're making JavaScript work. We changed some stuff in JavaScript. We're using CSS. Anyway, if I inspect the page, open, whoops, look at the elements, I can look at the different things. All right, I get to one. And now here I can see my H1 class where I've added a class named monkey. I can see over here my class named monkey and the color, and it's telling me that it's in a CSS file. I can click this link, and that'll actually load the CSS file itself. So I can go through and look at it. Now, a lot of times you may look at a CSS file inside of a WordPress site, and I am not exaggerating. There are plenty of themes I worked with in the past where the CSS file will be in excess of like 30 to 40,000 lines of code. All right, that is like insane. 30 to 40,000 lines of like impossible to just go through and manually edit, right? That's just how these things work. There's a lot of work that goes behind the scene creating these themes, and especially these theme builders. Now, a lot of times you're not going to see a nice clean CSS document like this where you're seeing all the rules nice and laid out. If I go back to my page and go to my original thing here, oops, my elements, and I look at one of these classes and I click on this link, sometimes you might just see like an insanely long line. Okay, so this has like on line 13 or 14. It even tells me this minified app bundle. What the word minified means, and this will come back up when we're talking about performance, is a lot of sites, once they get to a certain level of complexity, like having tens of thousands of lines in their CSS code, they will do what's called minifying that file, which basically just takes out all of the spaces. And somehow super nerds think that if you take out all of the spaces and you have everything that you would write in your entire file just in one insane, massive, long string, that somehow that makes it like, I don't know, in my estimation, a very insignificant, minuscule amount faster when it loads the document. But there's a lot of hardcore programmers who do a lot of things like that, and some of it is kind of standard on larger kind of frameworks like WordPress. So most of the time, or most of the time, a lot of the time, you can actually click on the CSS file itself, and then it'll take you right to the spot where that rule is in the CSS. But sometimes when you do it, and I'd say more and more than WordPress, which is why I'm bringing it up now, it's not something you'll be able to just go in and edit. right? Because it's a minified file. You don't even know where it is. You don't know how to get to it. You can't just edit it here. It's not going to work. I'll show you that in a minute. So unless you're actually creating the CSS file yourself, then using this to actually get into the CSS doesn't help a whole lot. It can help you to find the specific class or the specific ID that you're looking for, but then you'll have to actually put the stuff in a different place. I'm going to show you that here shortly inside of WordPress where that goes. All right, so it's just kind of a funky thing that when working with CSS, if you're building things from scratch, it's relatively easy to kind of go find what you're looking for and change it in the CSS. But when you're working with a big framework like WordPress, it's basically just buried in amongst a sea of files and things that run WordPress. And we just have to work with it in kind of a different way. So you don't have to open up and deal with a big minified file and unminify it and reminify it. It's kind of a nightmare. All right, so let me show you how to work with this. All right, so we'll start with just this basic one. If I'm looking at the elements, one thing I want to point out is that you can actually make changes while you're in the inspector, but it's a little bit fool's gold. All right, that you can see how things would look if you made changes, but they won't stick because obviously anyone can open this up on any website and they can change things. And you don't want anyone to be able to change anything on any website. That's chaos. But if I want to change this color, for example, instead of cute baby monkey in blue, I want to select this and choose this color instead. All right, you can see it changed. It shows it actually changing on the page. And now it shows this color in my CSS. All right, I think if I even click this, it even shows it changed in the CSS file itself. This is a little bit fool's gold. It's a very powerful tool to be able to play with these values and get them the way you need so it looks good. But then if I close this and refresh the page, it just goes back. Okay, it doesn't actually save anything. And the same thing can be said for your WordPress site. All right, so let's say, for example, that we want to mess with the spacing around this logo. Let's say we want to make this whole header maybe taller or wider. And you know, the first place to go through and look at this and deal with this would be in the customizer or the Divi options menu. It is just to try and find a way, you know, what does it give you that is kind of a meta level above the CSS that you can deal with and play with without actually having to get under the hood. But sometimes either you can't find it or it just doesn't exist and you just have to do something under the hood. Now, to open this up, and all of a sudden, like, okay, here's my giant page. Like maybe I could start at the very beginning and start picking through and finding exactly where this logo is. Because the key is I need to find the HTML tag with the logo on it so that I can find out which class and which ID it has. So I could then find out what styles are affecting it. So I could maybe change them or add some more. Now, there's a little tool inside of this inspector which makes it much easier for us to find these rather than find them manually. Well, I should point out, right now I was testing something on iPad, so I'm sitting here looking at this as if it were an iPad. I've showed all of this to you before. I'll just leave it, it doesn't matter. But the little button next to, so I've showed you the device toolbar toggle, that's what this does. It takes it from, I'll just leave it off. It takes it from just showing the whole desktop page to being able to test on different devices. You should all be familiar with that by now, having tested for your home page, these different sizes. But the one next to it with the little select an element thing, all right? If I select that, it doesn't matter if I'm in iPad mode or not. If I select this little element thing, now all of a sudden as I drag around on my page, I'm not clicking anything, but notice what's happening is it's showing me the CSS information about each of these items on the page as I go around. All right, so I can see this make an appointment button. It's showing me it's a dot and then it's got all these different classes and then it's even showing me the color and the background. It's literally showing me a little rollover of all of the different properties that are handling that. All right, so let me see the logo here. Okay, so I see image sign logo. So it's telling me it's an image tag and it has a class, or not a class, but an ID called logo. I mean, there's only going to be one of them. I don't see any other styles around it, but we've got it sitting here. And if I click on it, it actually takes me to the HTML tag that is loading that, all right? So that jumped me down to select this actual image source HTML tag. This is what's physically loading the logo. So I'm going to come back to the details in a second, but I really want you to understand the select an element thing, all right? So you could go around and, okay, I want to select my nav bar, or maybe, you know, maybe I get this whole header area, and that just selected a div with a class named logo underscore container. And then I can maybe click on one of the individual nav elements, and that just took me down here. I've got this nav called top menu nav, and then it shows me the list items for each element, and you can really get under the hood and see how every individual little thing is built. That can be insanely overwhelming when you're looking through thousands and thousands of lines of code that you didn't build from scratch. Even if you did build it from scratch, it would be overwhelming by the time you're looking at it again. So when you want to use CSS, and again, the reason you would want to use it in Divi or in WordPress is if you just have to tweak something or move something or add some styles to something that you just can't find a way to do it in the interface. So let's just pretend that we can't find, you know, any other way to deal with the logo. And I can use this little thing. I can select the logo. It takes me directly to the HTML tag. So you can see it's an image tag, the source. It's giving me this URL to the source of the logo. It's got an alt tag, which is what is an accessibility thing. Lets screen readers know what to say when they get to it. But here's its ID for CSS. Its ID is named logo. And then there's some data tags, these little parameters inside the tag. I don't have to worry about that. It's just other stuff. What I'm more interested in is seeing that, okay, I can select this HTML tag. It's buried in here. Like, it's probably 100 or so lines down. It would have taken me forever to find this manually. Using this little selector thing, I can just go find it, click on it, takes me right to the right spot. And then over here in the CSS area, it's actually showing me all the CSS tags that are attached to it. All right, and now I can make changes to this and kind of mess with it to figure out what I would want to put in CSS if I want it to stick. All right, so this shows me again, sign logo. This is my ID of logo, and somewhere inside the CSS file, I click this link, it'll take me to the minified version, so that doesn't really help. But somewhere inside the CSS file, there's all of these rules, okay? And I can go ahead and, let's say right now max height is set to 54%, okay? Maybe I'll uncheck that. And that doesn't look like it did anything. What if I adjust this? Is that actually gonna change anything visually? What if I bring it down? There we go, okay. So I'm making the logo smaller. Not exactly what I wanted, but I am making it smaller. And I can actually tell, so it's nice and small, I can tell this thing to either affect or not affect just by the check mark. And again, this doesn't save anything, but this lets you find what it is you're trying to do, all right? So this has a margin bottom of 0. Maybe if I say this is a margin bottom of 10, maybe I'll go, oh, I didn't like that. Go back to why things are cross out for now. Let's see, how about, maybe I'll just play with padding. So besides just seeing what these CSS lines are, I can go in and add a new one. I can add one. Padding, I'll start to type. It'll show me all of the options here. I can choose padding, and then by default, this shows the padding all the way around. So if I want 100 pixels around my logo, that made it completely disappear. I'll bring that down to 10 pixels. Holy crap, that's making it super, super small. And now I can sit here and use the arrow keys, and I can adjust this. And I can see that in this case, as I bring my padding up, it's actually, let me take off this max height, go back to padding, -2, right? And I can sit here and basically I can just adjust this value, and I can see in real time how it's affecting my page. So I can see that green area is showing the padding around the logo, and it's moving it around. Now, I will tell you that there's a reason we want to avoid CSS at all costs if we can, because it is a royal pain and extremely time consuming to use it in this way. Like I avoid like the plague having to go over to the hood and use CSS like this. But there's plenty, if you search for things on Divi in the web, there's plenty of little CSS snippets showing you like just exactly what to use without necessarily having to use these tools to go in under the hood and find what you're trying to use, okay? So let's say I want to keep this. So I decide I want my logo crappy like this, and this 40 padding gives it to me, right? So I added this line called padding 40 pixels, and this is to this logo ID, right? So I know what I want because I played with it in the inspector, but now I need to save it, close this and refresh. It's all gonna go away, okay? So all gone. So what we need is, where do we actually put CSS? If we can't just change it in the inspector, then we can't like just go find a CSS file because it's all buried and minified somewhere within the theme. The theme actually opens up a couple of different places for us to do this. Let me show you. We go into WordPress, and inside of the theme customizer, all right? So I'm gonna go to Appearance Customize, let this load. And some of you may have found this already, but as you go through the customizer, this is in every single theme. This is not Divi specific. This should be built into any theme in WordPress right now. The very bottom one is called Additional CSS. And it actually even tells you, add your own CSS code here to customize, blah, blah, blah. Okay, I can close what it says there. What I have is I have this little column over here where I can actually write CSS, and it will add whatever I put in this custom column to the big complicated CSS file that we need. So if, for example, I wanted to make a change to my logo, I can actually call it here. I can create a CSS selector here, and I can use pound logo or hashtag logo, which I know from, let me open this in a different tab as well. Open this in a new tab and look at the front end of the site, and I'm going to inspect it again, and I'm going to use this little pointer thing again and click on the logo again. So what I want to see is, I want to see that like this logo tag, this has a bunch of styles on it. All right, so I don't need to copy all of this. I could copy all of this, go back here, I could paste it in, and now I can see, I can see what all of the styles are here, and I could even play with them here. So if I want to mess with this max height, play with it here, and I can see it in real time happen. But what's important to understand is this little additional CSS, this isn't necessarily replacing what's there. It will just add in addition to, and it should overwrite any of these that are already there. All right, so that's really important. So for example, if I just use max height here, there's still a max height that is 54% over here in the original file. But then if I put the exact same thing here and put max height at 34% or 24%, this version should actually overwrite the one that's in the CSS file, and it'll make the change. So we can overwrite existing ones, or we can just create new ones. So if I want to make my padding here and set it to 10 pixels, and that makes the logo smaller for all the other rules. That's the thing, is when you get into CSS, it's just a huge learning curve to understand what it's all doing and how CSS is moving things around. So that's one thing that I love about building apps and using HTML canvas to build things on the web. There's downsides, which I can talk about towards the end of this class as well, as far as search engine optimization, stuff like that. What I love about using that technique is there is no CSS to deal with. We're basically skipping it and using the HTML canvas instead to lay things out using JavaScript. But for any traditional website with CSS, a lot out there, we have to use this. And it can be very, very confusing and time consuming to understand what the heck it is you're trying to change and what you're trying to do. All right, so just doing something very simple like changing the size of the logo or the space around it. Like, you may need to spend a lot of time getting deep about what's currently being used to position everything and to lay it all out on the screen. And then what CSS tags can I change and what other ones are available for me to use to get the look that I want to use. So without getting anything specific yet, this is pretty complicated, am I right? As you can see, like there's just a ton that's already in here with classes and IDs and a ton of CSS on every single one that's making the whole page work. So for us to want to just jump in and start messing with this stuff, Again, avoid like the plague. If you can, try and do everything just with Divi and just with the builder and with the sea of endless customizations you have in the design tab and the advanced tab of the Divi kind of editor there. There's just, you're going to be so much better off positioning things like that if you can than actually going under the hood for CSS. But sometimes it's necessary. Sometimes it is necessary to do what you need to do in this way. So now let me show you a second place that we can put CSS, because this is like a catch-all, all right? This additional CSS box that's in the customizer. Sure, you can put some stuff in here, but like, first of all, you don't have much space to work with. Like, it will start wrapping once I get something longer. It just starts wrapping the screen, and it can get very confusing to look at. Get rid of that. But it also, this kind of is just a catch-all that affects everything, all right? So you have to specifically lay out the class and the ID that you want for this, all right? Now, there's another spot to deal with CSS inside of Divi itself, inside of the builder. So let's go take a look at that. I'm just gonna go back to the main page, and I'm gonna enable the visual builder to get in here. Now, Divi gives you a way to attach CSS, or at least to attach specific class and IDs to different Divi elements. All right, so we can do this whether we are at the section level, or the row level, or the individual module level. All right, so let's start at the module, I guess, or the module setting, and it's under advanced. And you can see that under advanced, and this is going to be the same as I open the module first, but it could be in any of them. You'll see in a minute. You've got two different CSS options here. First of all, you've got CSS ID and classes. All right, so this is where you can actually set a specific CSS ID or a specific class name for that element, so you can then control it. All right, so for example, I've got this text block right here that I'm using, and let's say I want to give it an ID. It's one specific thing. I'm going to give an ID of, let's say, test-text. All right, so I will save that, and then I will save my page, or else I don't think it'll take. All right, and now I can go back into, let's see, I should leave this open, enable visual builder on this tab. And then on this tab, I will stay in my theme customizer where I can get to it. All right, actually, I will open yet a third one that has the home page there open without the Divi builder. All right, so I'm going to show you how this can stick. So I went in, again, I just went inside of the module and went to advanced, and under CSS ID and classes, I gave it an ID. I could also give it a class. Maybe I'll call it test-class, so you can see them both. All right, I'm going to check it. And it's really important that I save this page, or else I don't think that's going to stick if I try and look at it or deal with it in any way. All right, so now if I go back to the page without any of the Divi builder, now nothing changes yet. I just gave them kind of an identifier. But if I were to go to inspect now, and now if I use my little arrow tool to find this piece of text, I can select it. And let's see if I can find it here. Let's see, this. Okay, here we go. So here is a div ID, and you can see that an ID of test-text is now there. So we added that through Divi and just added that ID, and then the class, it looks like, did not take, oh yeah, there we go. Test class is in there also amongst the other class names, okay? So we can add our own ID and class names just by doing that. But what does that do for us, right? So once we've actually gone in and just added our own names to the HTML tags, and it's really cool that you can do this, that in Divi you can go to any single object and just add classes and stuff to it. So then we can deal with it, okay? So now that I've attached those, now I can go over here to my additional CSS thing, and I can actually use it. So if I were to want to affect the ID, the pound sign of test text, an identifier, now I can totally just change things. So let's again say padding, and we'll give this like 50 pixels, and all of a sudden you can see that actually changed on the screen. I make this 150 pixels. Let's just going to blow it all up and just put more spacing around this. You see how I did that? I was very specifically trying to affect this one thing, and I was able to do that by giving it a specific ID and then changing what's in the CSS. You can specifically name, besides going and finding what is already named, just by going in and using the inspector and looking around and finding what might already be named. Like for example, the logo, I don't need to give the logo another name if I already has an ID and I can find it. But when you're making your own page, like there's tons of little IDs and things that it makes, but they might not make much sense to you. So to give your own IDs and your own classes to work for them. And again, this is not just at the module level, but you can do this at the row or the section as well. So if I want to change this entire section, I can click it and go to advanced. And once again, I've got CSS ID and CSS class right here. So that's going to be on any single Divi element, whether it's a row, a section, or a module. And you can give it its own CSS name so you can go control things. And then the other thing that's on here is custom CSS. All right, so this is interesting that we should be able to, I don't use this as much, but this is a way that without having to use the customizer and without having to give yourself custom IDs and classes, you should be able to just actually write CSS rules in here. So the difference between the before, the main element, and the after, that kind of is like a rendering thing. I'm not too worried about that. But let's say on this main element, if I wanted to change the padding. So if I go to try padding and change it to like 50 pixels, and you can see that it changes. All right, so maybe I want to change it to 150 pixels, and that's actually changing on the page. So that's two separate ways, is that I can have this more global area where I put all of my CSS here, and that'll affect everything. Doesn't matter what page it's on or anything, this will affect all of that stuff. And I can, create my own tags within Divi to call out here, or I can just put, without having to call out the selector, I can actually just stick CSS rules inside of Divi elements like this, okay? So that's kind of how it works. CSS is a messy, messy part of the web that I've never been a fan of. I always try to avoid it because it can be extremely time consuming, and there's just a lot of a learning curve to understand how to use it. I mean, what I just explained to you is the basics of how it works, but what I mean by how to use it is like what padding means. And, sure, it puts padding around the outside, but there's also padding left, padding right, or I could put in different values for each side. And there's countless CSS rules, and it takes a lot for you to get to the point where you just know CSS, you just know kind of what rules to use, how they affect things. It's a constantly changing landscape, and it even can be different from browser to browser. So some CSS tags are supported in some modern browsers, and they wouldn't be supported in some older browsers like Internet Explorer, and you have to do things like know which browsers you need to be responsible for your end audience and all kinds of stuff. So it can get very messy, but this is something that you may need to tackle if you're trying to do some very specific things. Once again, a very, very quick kind of wrap up on any site. So it doesn't matter, it doesn't have to be a Divi site, a WordPress site. I could go to espn.com and I can right click, choose inspect, and I can see all of the content in all the HTML for this public page. And I can even select the individual things, and I can see all of the CSS rules and everything that it uses too. So let's see if their CSS is minified. I would assume it is. Yes, it is. There's just one line of code going all the way across. But I can use this on any site just to kind of dig in and try and find the element I'm looking for and see what kind of CSS it already has attached to it. I can even use this to make simple changes. So let's say instead of this, maybe I want a different color. And I'm not going to change anything here. Let me go to the top body tag. I can really blow something up. Go to the top body tag, and maybe I'll change the font weight. And maybe I'll change the background color of ESPN.com from this color to this juice color. And let's not have the background showing through. It's got other stuff going on. But anyway, I can go in and find this on any site and make changes and edits and things, but they won't stick unless I actually put them in CSS. And with WordPress, now if we're building it from scratch, that's great. We can just go in and edit our CSS file, or even inline an HTML file if we didn't separate it into a separate file. But when we're working with WordPress, a ton of it is already built in, and we can use this additional CSS spot in our theme customizer, or we can use Divi itself to go in and either add tags that we can then, or identifiers, I should say, in CSS, classes and IDs, and we can make all of those rules, or we can just do it in Divi itself. Now, if you've spent any significant time building things from scratch with HTML, CSS, you will just absolutely love moving to something like WordPress and Divi, that you can do most of the stuff without doing this. It just is extremely time consuming. It can be very, very frustrating. It can be especially frustrating when you're working with something that you didn't build and you're trying to make changes to it. So as we move forward here, that's kind of the nuts and bolts of using CSS in WordPress. It used to be you would create what's called a child theme. That's not really used much anymore. You can create what's called a child theme, which is a way to make a copy of your parent theme. So you can make CSS changes and it won't affect the parent theme, so it won't change when you update the theme. That's not really something we need to worry about anymore. Now most themes are modernized to the point where you can just use the customizer like this and it just works, which is nice. But even if you decide that you want to make some little mini edits and things, like, you know, now you can see how you need to do it or where you need to do it, but it's something I would try to avoid if you can. Like if there's something you just can't do with the Divi layout between, I understand the header and the footer being not part of the Divi layout, so you may have to use the Divi theme builder to make your own header or footer, so you can use the Divi layout to control it. But do everything you can to not have to use CSS. But if you do, there's a way to deal with it. I can help you do a specific thing if you get down to one tiny little thing, like I'm trying to space these out a little more down here and it won't let me, or, you know, I'm trying to do something very specific that I can't find in the interface or that I know for sure won't let me through the interface. We could get under the hood and use CSS to do so.